Hey, deserving listeners, a lot of you have been asking me to watch The Vow and react to it, the documentary The Vow. It's a documentary about a cult called NXIVM. So let's get to the show. My name is Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor. Let's watch the show and see if anything of interest comes out of my face.
Films was going to be Mark Vicente, the director of the film. What the bleep do we know?
All right, so the first thing that I'll react to is What the Bleep Do We Know? This documentary I remember seeing about 10 years ago-ish. And the more I got into the documentary and the more I actually talked to experts, the more I learned that the documentary takes a lot of leaps. It starts talking about some solid theoretical physics ideas, quantum physics, this kind of thing. And it extrapolates from that to dubious places. I don't remember the exact things that they were saying, but I remember the conclusions they were making were pseudo-religious, if you will, or spiritual, if you will. Anyway, let's continue watching.
If we understood the world in a better way, and if we understood ourselves in a better way, then we'd be able to understand how all of this works.
Right. So you see that in his synopsis there is, if we understand how the world works, meaning quantum physics and astrophysics, physics in general, and then we reflect on ourselves, maybe we can connect those two things. And there are some things there, but the way that this documentary went about it was, from my memory, pretty dubious. You'll see a lot of people do this where they will look at physics from their limited understanding and then try to extrapolate from that to make a point. Now, sometimes the points they're making are great, like love one another, we're all connected, let's think about the future. Positivity tends to promote positive things happening in your life for various reasons psychologically. But to connect it with string theory when you don't understand string theory is a little bit laughable.
At that time, I was really sick. I had a really bad cough. And Mark asked me something like, what do you lose if you stop coughing? And I had the awareness instantly that I had linked sickness and attention. I was trying to get my boyfriend's attention. And, the next day I got better right away.
Okay, so let's review what she said there. She said that she had a cough and she was annoyed with it. Then Mark, I believe that his name was, says, what are you getting out of the cough? What is the cough giving you in life? And then she's like, oh, that's an interesting way to think about it. What is the cough? Okay, the cough, if I really think about it, it's my way of getting attention. I'm trying to get attention from someone. I'm guessing she concluded that that's not a healthy way to try to get attention, that more direct ways would work, or maybe it was pointless to try to get attention from someone that isn't going to give you attention or something like that. I don't know. And when she realized that, the cough started to go away and she got better. All right. So empirically speaking, scientifically speaking, we can look at this a number of different ways. One is that psychologically, the awareness changed her perspective or her control or her motivations, and that changed away from the cough, and then she didn't need to cough anymore. I could certainly see that happening. The other possibility is that her cough just coincided. All of us have had coughs, and 99.9% of the time, it gets a little worse, and then there's a peak, and then it comes down. Well, just because things correlate in time does not mean they're caused. Like, there's lots of examples like this where people will get mistaken. They'll take a certain pill that their friend says, you need to take this, and then their cough goes away. Well, it's unknown if the pill was what caused the cough to go away, or the cough just was going to go away anyway. The other possibility is placebo. Placebo is a very powerful effect. The other possibility is that she was, as she was saying, she used cough to get attention, and she was getting attention from Mark. And as she got attention from him, one, her cough went away because she didn't need to do that anymore. Or two, when we are paid attention to, we tend to think of ourselves as like these biological independent things that don't really have any connection with other people. We are very social animals. We are one of the most social animals on the planet, meaning that a lot of our physiology and our psychology and our well-being and our blood pressure and our digestion and our sleep cycle depends on us feeling safe in relationships. Not everyone, but the vast majority of people. The reason why I'm saying this is I believe, given the the very first 6 minutes of this documentary, that they're going to go into things like this, and I just want to establish that up front. Trying to discover causation versus correlation is difficult, and I'm wondering if they're going to get a little fuzzy around that. Let's continue watching.
My first 5-day, I was picturing a large stadium type of Tony Robbins forum with hundreds of people. Rah, rah, rah.
Right. Another person that you might think about is Tony Robbins, and there are a lot of other people like him. And I want to be clear, I do not want to denigrate these programs. It's tempting for therapists to denigrate these because they might be perceived as a competition to our industry. There are many, many reports of these sorts of programs, Tony Robbins, Landmark, working really well for people. But there are concerns that I've had with Landmark and other kinds of programs like that, but there are concerns about psychotherapy. I mean, if you listen to my podcast, I have heard so many stories about clinicians, psychologists, marriage and family therapists, counselors, psychiatrists, doing things that are terrible. So it's not like my industry is without its problems. But the hope that I have is that people have awareness of the pros and cons to whatever field they're getting into, whether it's clinical therapy services or these kinds of services. So it's a matter of informed consent, that people need to know what's happening, and they also need to know safeguards. Like, for example, in my field, when a client comes to a therapist, the client should know that they deserve to have certain answers, certain questions answered. Like, what are you going to do with me? What's the research say about my problem? What's the prognosis? Where are we headed? What's your training? You know, there's certain questions that you should be able to get an answer from the clinician about. You know, you go to your physician and you, I don't know, have back pain or something. And you should be able to ask your physician, what's your diagnosis, what's your treatment, and what's the prognosis? What's the likelihood of the treatment working or not? Physicians know how to answer that question. They say, well, you have a diagnosis of this. This is what I'm going to try. And if this doesn't work, then we have some other more extreme things we might look into. And the prognosis, according to research, is about a 30% chance of remission of symptoms. Your therapist should be able to answer that, maybe not quite as precisely as that, because it's a psychological issue and not something as easily studied as a medical thing. But these sort of services aren't usually licensed, and they're not usually under an ethical code of any kind. Again, that doesn't mean just because you have a licensed marriage and family therapist who is under an ethical code that everything is going to be fine. But these kinds of services, they're essentially unregulated for the most part. In my field, we have education, we have ethical courses, we have supervision, we have licensing boards, we have, you know, some checks and balances that should be more robust, but it's there. For these kinds of things, Tony Robbins and Nexium and Landmark Forum, the problem that it provides, and even though it does help a lot of people, when you go to Landmark, for example, and you say, so tell me what you see in me, tell me what you're trying to do to me, and tell me the prognosis. Because my anecdotal experience, from what I understand, is a lot of these kinds of services, they will say, oh, it'll work. You just have to believe, that kind of thing. Instead of saying something like, well, according to research, about 33% of people report that they're glad they came here for this amount of time. And there's another percentage of people that said it was like a mix. And there's a percentage of people that actually hated our service, that wish they could have never came here and they were actually hurt by our service. How many of these people actually report that? Because, of course, that's likely, right? That any service there's going to be a percentage of people that benefit, there's going to be a percentage of people that are mixed, and there's going to be a percentage of people that either hated it or even got worse because of it. That's often the problem with these kinds of services, is that they don't have the ethic or the practice or even the self-awareness to look at that and give the customer the information so that they can proceed forward with informed consent, if you will. I don't know that, though. I don't know. Maybe Nexium had that, and we'll see. But let's continue watching.
Huddle, and 1, 2, 3.
We line up in rank order.
we do the handshake.
Give me your hand. Shake my hand. So if we learn how to shake hands, we shake like this. You know, it was just weird.
Keith and Nancy have titles, and with their titles, we don't use their names. Thank you, David. Thank you.
I didn't like calling Nancy prefect and Keith vanguard.
So on the surface, it looks weird from the outside, right? You're like, so they have these weird sashes. They're doing pseudo-religious, cultish greetings. There's a way that you shake your hand. You have to call vanguard and prefect, and it's like, what is going on here? Well, in a karate dojo, you call the teacher sensei, and there's, like, I'm a professor. I don't necessarily do this, but I have colleagues who will prefer their students call them Dr. So-and-so. There's a ritual of university life. You come in to class on time. You sit down, the professor comes in, and the class goes quiet, and everyone listens to the professor, and you watch the PowerPoint. There's a ritual to it, but it looks normal because it's so commonplace. These organizations, universities, Nexium, the military, karate dojos, police departments, a court of law, all rise for the judge. Everyone can sit. There's a robe, and the judge is on high, and you can never get too close, and you got to follow these rules. We have certain acceptable systems like that, and when we see a new one, we're like, ooh, what's going on with that? Or a Catholic church, for example. Certainly that isn't any less ceremonial and strange to an outsider that's not familiar than a Catholic church. It's tempting to look at it and be like, oh, it's suspect, it's cultish. Well, it can be used for evil, for sure. And I know enough about Nexium to know that at least a portion of Nexium was absolutely 1,000,000,000% evil. So it can be used for evil, like, Charlie Manson had certain rituals that he did with his people. There's all sorts of cults that do all sorts of horrible things that are along those lines. But it can also, these kinds of rituals can also be neutral, or they can even be beneficial. For example, in my university, when the students come in and they have their laptops in their bags and they sit in a horseshoe, and I am in the middle and I'm at my podium, and everyone is quiet, and I do the talking and they do the listening, and then I call on each person, and there's a respect that you're supposed to give me, even though I probably don't deserve it. But the point is there's a whole ritual. Why do we do that at the university? We certainly could do it a different way. I could just sort of sit down and be like, okay, someone else teach the class. Or I could stand to the wall and yell at the door. Or everyone could just sort of sit anywhere, and someone could sit at the podium if they wanted to, or everyone could stand and walk around the classroom. Why don't we do that? Well, because it creates safety. It creates a routine. It creates a place where everyone understands what's happening. Maybe even a sacred place, we might call it. Psychotherapy is the same way. There's a ritual to psychotherapy. Not every therapist follows this for sure, but there is a very common ritual that therapists don't invent. They just adopt because that's the ritual that came before us. I sit in a chair and I'm pretty close and it's quiet and there's a certain decor. You got to have a lot of books, therapists always have a lot of books. And there's just a routine to it. Now, why don't I lay down on the ground? How come I can't lay down? Why can't I just stand up and because when we do things that are outside of the ceremony, one, it creates chaos and confusion for people that want things to be safe. And two, it's distracting. We want to reduce distractions. Nexium is doing something along those lines.
And I was like, what the fuck regarding the sashes?
When you get the white sash, you're a student. When you get the yellow sash, you're a coach. Now, our conceptual founder, Keith Rainier, he wears a white sash. He considers himself a student of light.
I called Mark at the end of that day. And I was like, what the fuck did you get me involved with?
And along those lines, when we have graduation, we wear ridiculous, very old outfits that have sashes and tassels, and a doctoral level robe has these 3 bars on the thing. So again, just because it looks weird and it looks cultish does not mean it's evil. It can be used for evil. It was used for evil with Nexium, But let's think critically and more broad when we look at these kinds of things.
So the ranking system is a way to recognize the value people bring to the world. And what would make the world better is if people valued each other.
From the outside of both the university and of Nexium and of karate or karate and other military, it is clear and quite obvious that we will use physical representations of rank. You are a corporal, you are a major, you're a general, you have these insignias that designate you are above these other people. In Scientology, they had that ranking system. I think they had hundreds of ranks, if I remember right. And in Nexium, they had a ranking as well. The Mormon Church, the Catholic Church, universities, you'll have associate professors, adjunct professors, full-time professors, deans. There's a ranking system. You're a student, then you're a graduate student, then you're a doctoral student, then you're a fellow. There's all these designations that are clearly meant to designate your rank in the system. At a university, we say, here you are designated as a doctoral student or a master's student. You get one of those hoods. There's all these designations. And in Boy Scouts, they talked about that too. And so in Nexium, they wanted to do that.
People tribute for what they're capable of and what they do. And what if this thing you're looking for, this dark lining, what if it's not here, but what if you feel it inside of yourself?
There's a reason why we gravitate as human beings, and maybe you don't, but a lot of people do, will gravitate toward systems and groups that will have that kind of structure to it. There's something very appealing to us about that. It feels safe. We have a direction to go. It gives us a path forward, a goal to set forward. It gives us this opportunity of like, okay, you above me, you will approve of me. And as I move up the steps, you are telling me that I'm good enough and that I deserve this. And it feels concrete, because without that, it's hard to know if we're succeeding in life. It's hard to know, am I winning at life? But when someone gives you the next level of success, you're like, yes, I have won in life. And that can be very, very comforting. It can be used for evil. It can be used for neutral things. It can be used for good. It just depends. All right, well, that does it for that episode of Psychology in Seattle, in which we watched The Vow on HBO. If you haven't yet, subscribe below. That'd be cool. If you don't, also cool. If you want to hit the bell, that'd be cool. If you don't, that's cool. If you want to hit the thumbs up or the thumbs down or neither, that's also cool. If you want to comment below, that's cool as well. If you want to upvote people's comments, that's also cool. Or don't, that's also cool. Everything's cool. And everyone out there, please take care of yourself, because you deserve it. You really, really do.